For years, the island was treated like a rumor, a punchline, a conspiracy theory whispered online, a symbol for everything people suspected but couldn't prove. But now, with the files being released and the victims finally being able to speak out without being ignored, the island doesn't look symbolic anymore. It looks intentional, designed, engineered for one purpose: to operate outside the reach of the law, the media, and any institution that could have stopped Jeffrey Epstein decades earlier. People imagine the island as some kind of tropical paradise. It wasn't. It was a machine. A controlled environment where Epstein had the freedom to do what he couldn't do in the States. A location where flights weren't monitored the same way, where movement wasn't tracked the same way, where powerful visitors could land, disappear, and leave without anyone questioning anything. When you talk to the victims, you read their sworn statements, the pattern becomes painfully clear. Epstein didn't just build a trafficking network, he built a trafficking pipeline. The recruitment usually started far from the island, in Florida, in New York, sometimes overseas. Young girls were promised opportunities, modeling, education, connections, money for their families, the kind of promises predators always use when they want to lure the vulnerable. But Epstein's operation wasn't sloppy or chaotic. It was organized, structured, and that's what makes it so horrifying. There were recruiters, women who scouted, groomed, and tested boundaries. Victims described being brought into Epstein's orbit by adults who acted like gatekeepers, approving who got close, who was invited, and who moved along the pipeline. And the island was where the power imbalance reached its extreme. There, Epstein controlled everything: who arrived, who left, who watched, who stayed silent. Victims described arriving on the island and realizing immediately that something was wrong. They were isolated, no cell service, no support, no escape, and surrounded by adults who behaved as if this was normal, the ultimate psychological manipulation. Some of the girls were told they were special, others were told they were chosen, but all of them were told to keep quiet. The island wasn't just about privacy, it was about domination, about creating a world where the rules didn't apply, where accountability didn't exist, where powerful men could behave in ways that would destroy their lives if the public ever saw it. And the visitors weren't random. Flight logs show a steady rotation of wealthy, influential figures flying in and out. Some stayed for hours, some stayed for days, and some came more often than they admitted publicly. What's striking is how many institutions would have caught these movements if Epstein had been an ordinary person. International travel, cross-border activity, customs, immigration, financial transfers, large property purchases, private plane manifests. Yet somehow no one intervened. Instead, the island became an alternate reality, a place where elites could exist without the moral constraints they pretended to uphold publicly. Victims described being pressured, rewarded, threatened, groomed, psychologically worn down. The conditions believed this was normal or that nobody would believe them if even they tried to speak. And for years they were right. Nobody believed them. Police ignored them. Reporters dismissed them. Agencies minimized their claims. Judges sealed their testimonies. Not because the victims weren't credible, but because the truth was inconvenient. If these girls had been believed, powerful careers would have ended. Diplomatic ties would have fractured. Hollywood and media giants would have been exposed. Strategic alliances would have been disrupted. That's what Epstein offered: a space where rules disappeared and a system where evidence could be controlled. Even the layout of the island tells a story. Building placed strategically, private suites separated from staff areas, underground sections, heavily secured rooms, a strange temple-like structure whose purpose has never been fully explained. Multiple observers called it ritualistic, others called it decorative. But what actually happened inside? Nobody has been given a straight answer. Visitors insist they did nothing wrong. Victims insist otherwise, and the truth is buried somewhere between those two extremes. And files still sealed, flights still redacted, and testimonies still hidden. But the island wasn't the whole operation, it was the hub. There were properties in Palm Beach, a mansion in New York that looked like a fortress, a ranch in New Mexico, apartments in Paris, each location with its own purpose, its own set of victims, its own rotation of guests. That's why this wasn't a one-man crime spree. It was a multi-state, multi-country trafficking system with infrastructure, money, legal support, political insulation, and enough protection to keep the operation running for decades. And that raises a question nobody in power wants to answer. How does a man build properties across the globe, move victims across borders, host elites, operate private jets, and run a trafficking pipeline for 30 years without someone in authority stopping him? Victims reported what happened. Locals noticed suspicious activity. Journalists heard rumors. Detectives found evidence. Agencies had files. Yet, Epstein stayed protected. You don't get that kind of cover unless influential people benefit from the secrecy. The island isn't the scandal. It's the physical evidence that the operation was real, not exaggerated. Organized, not chaotic. Protected, not ignored. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about who those victims were, what they endured, how they survived, and what they told investigators that the public never heard. Their voices were ignored for decades. You're going to hear from them. If you want that breakdown, hit like, comment truth, and subscribe because episode 5 is the most important one yet. The victims deserve to be heard, and their testimony will change how you see this entire case.